I can't tell you how wonderful it is to see you all here. We had no idea how many folks would brave the elements out here, but bless you all. It's just great to see you. And it affirms why it's so important to have this gathering every year. And so your presence really makes that statement in a very significant way. My name is Paula Elliott, and my job usually is to break out into some type of song to help people gather. Before I do that, I'd like to read a poem by Robert Hayden. He wrote it in 1966 for Frederick Douglass. As I think about this poem, and I think about the song that we just heard, Better Get to Learnin', by Rhiannon Giddens, the significance of education for our children really comes to mind and I think drives many of us here today. So again, welcome. When it is finally ours, this freedom, this liberty, this beautiful and terrible thing, needful to man as air, usable as earth, when it belongs at last to all, when it is truly instinct, brain matter, diastole, systole, reflex action, when it is finally one, when it is more than the gaudy mumbo-jumbo of politicians, this man, this Douglass, this former slave, this Negro beaten to his knees, exiled, visioning a world where none is lonely, none hunted, alien. This man, superb in love and logic, this man shall be remembered, oh, not with the statues' rhetoric, not with legends and poems and wreaths of bronze alone, but with the lives grown out of his life, the lives fleshing his dream of the beautiful, needful thing. Robert Hayden's words also remind me of the artist Oscar Brown Jr. and Abbey Lincoln. Oscar Brown Jr. wrote the words to the song that I'm about to sing, As Long as You're Living, and Abbey Lincoln sang it for the first time. All of this happened at around the same time that Robert Hayden wrote that poem, so there was this synergy. So I hope that this will evoke that energy in the past and inspire your energy today. As long as you're living. Excuse me if I seem to preach, but there is something that I have to say, a message that I hope would reach people who are throwing lives away. I call it my philosophy, that is why I pass it on to you, because it works so well for me and helps me get away from strafe. I hope you listen carefully, know the truth will set you free. And that's the way it ought to be, 'cause this is your life. Long as you're living, always remember, life is for spending, but there's an ending. While you are sleeping, lifetime is creeping. Wake up and taste it, foolish to waste it. Sample and savor all of its flavor, long as you're living. Long as you're living, always remember, folks who are lazy are playing crazy. Better keep moving, keep on improving. You won't be worried after you're buried. Live every minute, put yourself in it, long as you're living. Long as you're living. Long as you're living, always remember, life is worth living, and we're together, we're sisters and brothers, do unto other, loves for enjoying, hates for destroying. Never forget it, or you'll regret it, long as you live it. Excuse me if I seem to preach, but there was something that I had to say, a message that I hope would reach people who were throwing lives away. I call it my philosophy. That is why I pass it on to you, because it works so well for me and helps me get away from strife. I hope you listen carefully. Know the truth will set you free. And that's the way it ought to be, because people, this is your life. This is your life. This is your life. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Let me bring up Lamerchi Frazier to welcome us to the museum.
Thank you, Paula Elliott, singer, educator. We are really blessed to have her today to open this program, and I just want to give her another round of applause, please, of appreciation for reminding us that this is our life. Thank you, Paula. Paula has been with this reading for over a decade at almost every one. She has reminded me. And we are really grateful that she is so giving of her music and her talent to add to what we have here, not only in this space, but in the park and the commons. And at this time, I would like to speak to you and welcome you in this space on behalf of the board of the Museum of African American History, its CEO President Leon Wilson and the staff, along with our partners, the Charles Hamilton Houston Institute, Community Change, and we are sponsored, and thank Eastern Bank for their support. I'm also wanting to thank those of you who have weathered this storm to be physically present, and those who are with us on live stream. To locate you where you are, I want to begin by acquainting you with those who prepared this place for us to gather and why it is so significant to the event that we are now engaged in. The free Black community that is here in the 18th and 19th century purchased the land where we sit through the formation of their African society in 1798. And it goes from where we are in Beacon Hill on Joy Street between Myrtle and Cambridge Street. And they realized that in purchasing this building, that it was their investment in land. It was their investment in having real estate to then advance their citizenship. As they purchased this land, they began to build. It was mostly Black craftsmen who fashioned this place of beauty, a sacred trust, for there to be assembly for their needs, for building a community that was invested in education, invested in a beautiful space to worship, and a space to talk about ending slavery. Located here on the north slope of Beacon Hill, there were many conversations, many speeches, many concerts, many events that were held by this free Black community and those in common cause with them to meet the efforts of abolition. One of the most important that we are celebrating today, who delivered the address that we are going to hear in 1852 in Rochester, New York, was also in this space. He made this space come alive with his words in the cause of freedom. This is nothing to be taken lightly. And we are so happy to have you in this space and to be able to talk about this treasured, nurtured space preserved for the purposes that this event joins in with today. I think they saw us coming 200 years ago, and we were wise enough to take heed and to keep the building in the shape that you're seeing it in today, to advance these discussions which we still in the 21st century need to have. The arc of the centuries between the 17th, 18th, and 19th century on to the 21st century bring us here today. They talked about justice, they talked about equality, they talked about the uplift of humankind in this space. And so we want to thank you for being here with us. And appropriate to this space is the mention that Frederick Douglass spoke at this platform. He even sought refuge from a meeting that was held in Tremont Temple of the abolitionists when they needed to be sheltered from a riotous event. They came here. So with that, I'd like to say that the first reading of this message about the 4th of July to the Negro by Frederick Douglass was read here in this meeting house. And now, once again, after it's gone to Faneuil Hall and to the Boston Commons, we have come full circle. And I hope that we will heed and listen and apply the words of Frederick Douglass. And we thank you, the readers, in advance for doing the work of elevating this speech today. Without further ado, I'd like to say that we are pleased to have with us our collaborative partner, who is, as he calls himself, the former managing director of the Charles Hamilton Houston Institute, David Harris from Harvard University, who will lead you into the rest of the program, and we just want you to enjoy your words. David?
Thank you, Mercy, and welcome everyone. It is a wonderful and humbling experience to be here today, and as I always say about this event, it's about the speech and not speechifying, so I'm going to try to be very limited in what I have to say. I do have to add some thanks to our partners here and really recognize what a collective effort this is. This is the 12th time we've read this speech. We typically gather under the Shaw Memorial, the regiment, the 54th Regiment, which is newly restored, and we really regret that we couldn't be there today. However, I guess I'm not speaking loud enough, right? It's a problem I have. So you know, I have to give a special thanks to Mass Humanities, which isn't here today, but which has provided incredible support, both financial and moral and logistical, to pulling this off year after year. I also have to give a special thanks to Paula Elliott, who not only lent her voice and spirit to this, but was my counsel and shoulder to lean on and cry on throughout these last weeks as we tried to figure out how to move this event inside. And I also have to give a special thanks to Boston Light and Sound, who also went on this journey with us as we tried to work this out and get this done. And we have a number of co-sponsors for this event, and I'm going to read them off because I think it's important to acknowledge them. The Boston Mayor's Office of Resilience and Racial Equity, who will be here soon, Central Square Theater, Community Conversations, Sister to Sister, Everyday Boston, Friends of the Public Garden, the Hutchins Center for African and African American Research, the Jewish Voice for Peace at Boston, National Parks of Boston, the New Democracy Coalition, and I have to give a special thanks to Kevin Peterson as well, who was another shoulder I cried on, the Office of the Chief Diversity Officers at Tufts University, Royal House and Slave Quarters in Medford, Union Capitol, and the UU Urban Ministry. We are going to get to the speech, but I feel obligated to say, we began this with the title, Reading Frederick Douglass in the Age of Obama. The first year we did the speech was the year after his election. And I remember at the time, I was wont to say, as everybody was telling us that we were entering a post-racial society, that President Obama's election didn't free us from talking about race. It freed us to talk about race. And for me, sadly, I think we didn't take advantage of that as much as we did, and we got Trump as a result. We're back again in an era where it's very important for us to think about, understand, and be willing to talk about race. In a time when we have Juneteenth being recognized as a national holiday, joining Martin Luther King Day, and the shortest month of the year is Black History Month, you would think that we really have made a lot of progress. One of the lessons I take from Juneteenth that's really important as we move forward is that even as we think we are free, we recognize the need to do more. We recognize the struggle doesn't end, and we must carry on. And so, as we think about and listen and read and reflect today, I want us to think about how we exist in a community of people who are determined to change and determined to make this country live up to its ideals. So I want to close with one of my favorites, Langston Hughes, who once said, "Oh yes, I say it plain, America never was America to me. And yet I swear this oath, America will be." And I think this is what Douglass hopes for us as well. And with that, we're going to start the reading. One last thing. I have to give another special thanks to my colleague at the Houston Institute, Kelly Garvin, who always and forever stands up to make things happen for us. She never shows up here, but she's always making it happen. And with that, here are the logistics. We each are going to read a paragraph. Sadly, every one of you is going to be called upon to do so. We're going to line up over here and count your paragraphs, stay, don't lose track, and then scurry around the left side and go right back in line and find yourself another paragraph, okay? So there's a little exercise regimen here too, okay? All right, and with that, I want us to get started. I'm pleased to begin. Generally, yes, we are anonymous here, so I'm going to begin with one of our elected representatives, Jay.
Mr. President, friends, fellow citizens, the task before me is one which requires much previous thought and study for its proper performance. I do not remember ever to have appeared as a speaker before any assembly more shrinkingly, nor with greater distrust of my ability than I do this day. The papers and placards say that I am to deliver a 4th of July oration. The fact is, ladies and gentlemen, the distance between this platform and the slave plantation from which I escaped is considerable, and the difficulties to be overcome in getting from the latter to the former are by no means slight. That I am here today is, to me, a matter of astonishment as well as of gratitude.
This, for the purpose of this celebration, is the 4th of July. It is the birthday of your national independence and of your political freedom. This to you is what the Passover was to the emancipated people of God. It carries your minds back to the day and to the act of your great deliverance. This celebration also marks the beginning of another year of your national life, and reminds you that the Republic of America is now 76 years old. I am glad, fellow citizens, that your nation is so young. You are even now only in the beginning of your national career, still lingering in the period of childhood. I repeat, I am glad this is so. There is hope in this thought, and the hope is much needed under the dark clouds which lower above the horizon.
Fellow citizens, 76 years ago, the people of this country were British subjects. The style and title of your sovereign people, in which you now glory, was not born then. You were under the British crown. Your fathers esteemed the English government as the home government. England was the fatherland, although a considerable distance from your home, imposed an exercise of its parental prerogatives upon its colonial children such restraints, burdens, and limitations as in its mature judgment it deemed wise, right, and proper.
But your fathers, who had not adopted the idea of the infallibility of government and the absolute character of its acts, presumed to differ from the home government in respect to the wisdom and justice of some of those burdens and restraints. They went so far as to pronounce the measures of government unjust, unreasonable, and oppressive, and altogether such as ought not to be quietly submitted to. I scarcely need say, fellow citizens, that my opinion of those measures fully accords with that of your fathers. Feeling themselves harshly and unjustly treated by the home government, your fathers, like men of honesty and men of spirit, earnestly sought redress. They petitioned and remonstrated. They did so in a decorous, respectful, and loyal manner. This, however, did not answer the purpose. They saw themselves treated with sovereign indifference, coldness, and scorn. Yet they persevered.
Oppression makes a wise man mad. Your fathers became restive under this treatment. They felt themselves the victims of grievous wrongs, wholly incurable in their colonial capacity. With brave men, there is always a remedy for oppression. Just here, the idea of a total separation of the colonies from the crown was born. It was a startling idea, much more so than we at this distance of time regard it. The timid and the prudent of that day were, of course, shocked and alarmed by it. Their opposition to the then dangerous thought was earnest and powerful, but amid all their terror and affrighted vociferations against it, the alarming and revolutionary idea moved on, and the country with it.
On the 2nd of July, 1776, the Old Continental Congress, to the dismay of the lovers of ease and the worshippers of property, clothed that dreadful idea with all the authority of national sanction. They did so in the form of a resolution. We seldom hit upon resolutions drawn up in our day whose transparency is at all equal to it. Resolved that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown.
Citizens, your fathers made good that resolution. They succeeded, and today you reap the fruits of their success. The freedom gained is yours, and you therefore may properly celebrate this anniversary. The 4th of July is the first great fact in your nation's history, the very ring bolt in the chain of your yet undeveloped destiny.
Pride and patriotism, not less than gratitude, prompt you to celebrate and to hold it in perpetual remembrance. I have said that the Declaration of Independence is the ring bolt to the chain of your nation's destiny. So, indeed, I regard it. The principles contained in that instrument are saving principles. Stand by those principles. Be true to them on all occasions, in all spaces, in all places, against all foes, and at whatever cost.
Fellow citizens, I am not wanting in respect for the fathers of this republic. The signers of the Declaration of Independence were brave men. I cannot contemplate their great deeds with less than admiration. They were statesmen, patriots, and heroes. And for the good they did and the principles they contended for, I will unite with you to honor their memory.
They loved their country better than their own private interests, and all will concede that it is a rare virtue that ought to command respect. He who will intelligently lay down his life for his country is a man whom it is not in human nature to despise. Your fathers staked their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor on the cause of their country. In their admiration of liberty, they lost sight of all other interests.
They were peacemen, but they preferred revolution to peaceful submission to bondage. They were quiet men, but did not shrink from the agitating against oppression. They showed forbearance, but they knew its limits. They believed in order, but not in the order of tyranny. With them, nothing was settled that was not right. With them, justice, liberty, and humanity were final, not slavery and oppression. You may well cherish the memory of such men. They were great in their day and generation. Their solid manhood stands out to more as we contrast it with these degenerate times.
How circumspect, exact, and proportionate were all their movements. How unlike the politicians of an hour. Their statesmen looked beyond the passing moment and stretched away in strength into the distant future. Mark them, fully appreciating the hardship to be encountered, firmly believing in the right of their cause, wisely measuring the terrible odds against them. Your fathers, the fathers of this republic, laid the cornerstone of the national superstructure, which has risen and still rises in grandeur around you.
Of this fundamental work, this day is the anniversary. Our eyes are met with demonstrations of joyous enthusiasm. The causes which led to the separation of the colonies from the British Crown have never lacked for a tongue. They have all been taught in your common schools, narrated at your firesides, unfolded from your pulpits, and thundered from your legislative halls, and are as familiar to you as household words. They form the staple of your national poetry and eloquence. I leave, therefore, the great deeds of your fathers to others.
My business, if I have any here today, is with the present. The accepted time with God and his cause is the ever-living now. We have to do with the past only as we can make it useful to the present and to the future. Now is the time, the important time. Your fathers have lived, died, and have done their work, and have done much of it well. You live and must die, and you must do your work. You have no right to enjoy a child's share in the labor of your fathers, unless your children are to be blessed by your labors. You have no right to wear out and waste the hard-earned fame of your fathers to cover your indolence.
Fellow citizens, pardon me, allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? What have I, or those I represent, to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom and of natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us? And am I, therefore, called upon to bring our humble offering to the national altar and to confess the benefits and express devout gratitude for the blessings of your independence to us?
Would to God, both for your sakes and ours, that an affirmative answer could be truthfully returned to these questions. Then would my task be light and my burden easy and delightful. But such is not the state of the case. I say it with a sad sense of the disparity between us. I am not included within the pale of this glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us.
The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The sunlight that brought life and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I must mourn. To drag a man in fetters into the grand, illuminated Temple of Liberty and call upon him to join you in joyous anthems were inhuman mockery and sacrilegious irony. Do you mean, citizens, to mock me by asking me to speak today?
Fellow citizens, above your national tumultuous joy, I hear the mourning wail of millions whose chains, heavy and grievous yesterday, are today rendered more intolerable by the jubilee shouts that reached them. To forget them, to pass lightly over their wrongs, and to chime in with the popular theme would be treason most scandalous and shocking, and would make me a reproach before God and the world.
My subject, then, fellow citizens, is American slavery. I shall see this day from the slave's point of view. Standing here, identified with the American bondsman, making his wrongs mine, I do not hesitate to declare with all my soul that the character and conduct of this nation never looked blacker to me than on this 4th of July. Whether we turn to the declarations of the past or to the professions of the present, the conduct of the nation seems equally hideous and revolting. America is false to the past, false to the present, and solemnly binds herself to be false to the future.
Standing with God and the crushed and bleeding slave on this occasion, I will, in the name of humanity which is outraged, in the name of liberty which is fettered, in the name of the Constitution and the Bible, which are disregarded and trampled upon, dare to call in question and to denounce with all the emphasis I can command everything that serves to perpetuate slavery, the great sin and shame of America. I will not equivocate. I will not excuse. I will use the severest language I can command, and yet not one word shall escape me that any man whose judgment is not blinded by prejudice, or who is not at heart a slaveholder, shall not confess to be right and just.
I fancy I hear someone of my audience say, "It is just in this circumstance that you and your brother Abolinish failed to make a favorable impression on the public mind. Would you argue more and denounce less? Would you persuade more and rebuke less? Your cause would be much more likely to succeed. But I submit, where all is plain, there is nothing to be argued. What point in the anti-slavery creed would you have me argue? On what branch of the subject do the people of this country need light?"
Must I undertake to prove that the slave is a man? The slaveholders themselves acknowledge it in the enactment of their laws for their government. They acknowledge it when they punish disobedience on the part of the slave. There are 72 crimes in the state of Virginia, which, if committed by a black man, subject him to the punishment of death, while only 2 of the same crimes would subject a white man to like punishment. What is this but the acknowledgement that the slave is a moral, intellectual, and responsible being?
Southern statute books are covered with enactments forbidding, under the severe fines and penalties, the teaching of the slave to read or to write. When you can point to any such laws in reference to the beasts of the field, then I may consent to argue the manhood of the slave. When the dogs in your streets, when the fowls of the air, when the cattle on your hills, when the fish of the sea, and the reptiles that crawl shall be unable to distinguish the slave from a brute, then will I argue with you that the slave is a man.
Is it not astonishing that while we are plowing, planting, and reaping, using all kinds of mechanical tools, erecting houses, constructing bridges, building ships, working in metals of brass, iron, copper, silver, and gold, that while we are reading, writing, and ciphering, acting as clerks, merchants, and secretaries, having among us lawyers, doctors, ministers, poets, authors, editors, orators, and teachers, that while we are engaged in all manner of enterprises common to other men, digging gold in California, capturing the whale in the Pacific, feeding sheep and cattle on the hillside, living, moving, acting, thinking, planning, living in families as husbands, wives, and children, and above all, confessing and worshiping the Christian's God and looking hopefully for life and immortality beyond the grave, we are called upon to prove that we are men.
Would you have me argue that man is entitled to liberty, that he is the rightful owner of his own body? You have already declared it. Must I argue the wrongfulness of slavery? Is it to be settled by the rules of logic and argumentation as a matter beset with great difficulty, involving a doubtful application of the principle of justice, hard to be understood? How should I look today in the presence of Americans to show that men have a natural right to freedom? To do so would be to make myself ridiculous and to offer an insult to your understanding. There is not a man beneath the canopy of heaven that does not know that slavery is wrong for him.
What am I to argue? That it is wrong to make men brutes, to rob them of their history, to work them without wages, to keep them ignorant of their relations to their fellow men, to beat them with sticks, to flay their flesh with the lash, to load their limbs with irons, to hunt them with dogs, to sell them at auction, to sunder their families, to knock out their teeth, to burn their flesh, to starve them into obedience and submission to their masters. Must I argue that a system thus marked with blood and stained with pollution is wrong? No, I will not. I have better employments for my time and strength than such arguments would imply.
What then remains to be argued? Is it that slavery is not divine? That God did not establish it? That our doctors of divinity are mistaken? There is blasphemy in the thought. That which is inhuman cannot be divine. Who can reason on such a proposition? I cannot. The time for such argument is past.
At a time like this, scorching irony, not convincing argument, is needed. Oh, had I the ability, and could I reach the nation's ear, I would today pour out a fiery stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm, and stern rebuke. For it is not light that is needed, but fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake. The feeling of the nation must be quickened. The conscience of the nation must be roused. The propriety of the nation must be startled. The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed, and its crimes against God and man must be proclaimed and denounced.
What, to the American slave, is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him, more than all other days in the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham. Your boasted liberty an unholy license. Your national greatness swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless. Your denunciations of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence. Your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all your religious parade and solemnity, are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages.
There is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour. Go where you may, search where you will, roam through all the monarchies and despotisms of the old world, search out every abuse, and when you have found the last, lay your facts by the side of the everyday practices of this nation, and you will say with me that for revolting barbarity and shameless hypocrisy, America reigns without a rival.
Take the American slave trade, which we are told by the papers is especially prosperous just now, as the price of men was never higher, and which is carried on in all the large towns and cities in one half of this Confederacy. This trade is one of the peculiarities of the American institutions. In several states, this trade is a chief source of wealth. It is called the internal slave trade, in order to divert from it the horror with which the foreign slave trade is contemplated.
The foreign slave trade has long since been denounced by this government as piracy, as an execrable traffic. To arrest it, this nation keeps a squandrum at immense cost on the coast of Africa. Everywhere in this country, it is safe to speak of this foreign slave trade as a most inhuman traffic, opposed alike to the laws of God and of man. It is, however, a notable fact, while so much execration is poured out by Americans upon those engaged in the foreign slave trade, the men engaged in the slave trade between the states pass without condemnation, and their business is deemed honorable.
Behold the practical operation of this internal slave trade, the American slave trade, sustained by American politics and American religion. Here you will see men and women reared like swine for the market. You know what is a swine drover? I will show you a man drover. They inhabit all our southern states. They perambulate the country and crowd the highways of the nation with droves of human stock. You will see one of these human flesh jobbers armed with pistol, whip, and bowie knife, driving a company of 100 men, women, and children from the Potomac to the slave market at New Orleans. These wretched people are to be sold singly or in lots to suit purchasers. They are food for the cotton field and the deadly sugar mill.
Mark the sad procession as it moves wearily along, and the inhuman wretch who drives them. Hear his savage yells, his blood-chilling oaths as he hurries on his affrighted captives. There see the old man with locks thinned and gray. Cast one glance, if you please, upon the young mother whose shoulders are bare to the scorching sun, her briny tears falling on the brow of the babe in her arms. See, too, that girl of 13 weeping, yes, weeping, as she thinks of her mother from whom she has been torn. The drove moves tardily. Here, heat and sorrow have nearly consumed their strength. You hear the quick snap, like the discharge of a rifle. The fetters clank, the chains rattle simultaneously. Your ears are saluted with a scream that seems to have torn its way to the center of your soul? The crack you heard was the sound of the slave whip. The scream you heard was from the woman you saw with the babe. Her speed had faltered under the weight of her child, and her chains, that gash on her shoulder, tells her to move on.
Follow this drove to New Orleans. Attend the auction. See men examined like horses. See the forms of women rudely and brutally exposed to the shocking gaze of American slave buyers. See this drove sold and separated forever, and never forget the deep, sad sobs that arose from that scattered multitude. Tell me, citizens, where under the sun you can witness a spectacle more fiendish and shocking. Yet this is but a glance at the American slave trade as it exists at this moment in the ruling part of the United States.
I was born amid such sights and scenes. To me, the American slave trade is a terrible reality. The fleshmongers gather up their victims by dozens and drive them chained to the general depot at Baltimore. When a sufficient number have been collected here, a ship is chartered for the purpose of conveying the forlorn crew to Mobile or to New Orleans. From the slave prison to the ship, they are usually driven in the darkness of night, in the deep, still darkness of midnight. I have been often aroused by the dead, heavy footsteps and the piteous cries of the chained gangs that passed our door.
Fellow citizens, this murderous traffic is, today, an active operation in this boasted republic. In the solitude of my spirit, I see clouds of dust raised on the highways of the South. I see the bleeding footsteps. I hear the doleful wail of feathered humanity on the way to the slave markets, where the victims are to be sold like horses, sheep, and swine, knocked off to the highest bidder. There, I see the tenderest ties ruthlessly broken to gratify the lust, caprice, and rapacity of the buyers and sellers of men. My soul sickens at the sight.
But a still more inhumane, disgraceful, and scandalous state of things remains to be presented. By an act of American Congress not yet 2 years old, slavery has been nationalized in its most horrible and revolting form. Mason and Dixon's line has been obliterated. New York has become as Virginia, and the power to hold, hunt, and sell men, women, and children as slaves remains no longer a mere state institution, but is now an institution of the whole United States.
The power is coextensive with the Star-Spangled Banner and American Christianity. Where these go, may also go the merciless slave hunter. But where these are, man is not sacred. He is a bird for the sportsman's gun. By that most foul and fiendish of all human decrees, the liberty of every person, the person of every man are put in peril. Your broad Republican domain is hunting ground for men.
Your lawmakers have commanded all good citizens to engage in this hellish sport. Your president, your Secretary of State enforce as a duty you owe to your free and glorious country and to your God that you do this accursed thing. Not fewer than 40 Americans have within the past 2 years been hunted down and without a moment's notice, hurried away in chains and consigned to slavery and excruciating torture. Some of these have had wives and children dependent on them for bread, but of this no account was made. The right of the hunter to his prey stands superior to the right of marriage and to all rights in this republic, the rights of God included.
For Black men, there is neither law nor justice, humanity nor religion. The fugitive slave law makes mercy to them a crime and bribes the judges who tries them. An American judge gets $10 for every victim he consigns to slavery, and $5 when he fails to do so. The oath of any two villains is sufficient under this hell-black enactment to send the most pious and exemplary Black man into the remorselessness jaws of slavery. His own testament is nothing. He can bring no witnesses for himself. The minister of American justice is bound by the law to hear but one side, and that side is the side of the oppressor.
Let this damning fact be perpetually told. Let it be thundered around the world that in tyrant-killing, king-hating, people-loving, democratic, Christian America, the seats of justice are filled with judges who hold their offices under an open and palpable bribe and are bound in deciding in the case of a man's liberty to hear only his accusers.
In glaring violation of justice, in shameless disregard of the forms of administering law, in cunning arrangement to entrap the defenseless, and in diabolical intent, this fugitive slave law stands alone in the annals of tyrannical legislation.
Americans, your Republican politics, not less than your Republican religion, are flagrantly inconsistent. You boast of your love of liberty, your superior civilization, your pure Christianity, While the whole political power of the nation is solemnly pledged to support and perpetuate the enslavement of 3 million of your countrymen, you hurl your anathemas at the crowned-headed tyrants of Russia and Austria, and pride yourselves on your democratic institutions, while you yourselves consent to be mere tools and bodyguards of the tyrants of Virginia and Carolina.
You invite to your shores fugitives of oppression from abroad. Honor them with banquets, greet them with ovations, cheer them, toast them, salute them, protect them, and pour out your money to them like water. But the fugitives from your own land, you advertise, hunt, arrest, shoot, and kill. You glory in your refinement and your universal education, yet you maintain a system as barbarous and dreadful as ever stained the character of a nation, a system begun in avarice, supported in pride, and perpetuated in cruelty.
You shed tears over fallen Hungary and make the sad story of her wrongs the theme of your poets, statesmen, and orators, till your gallant sons are ready to fly to arms to vindicate her cause against the oppressor. But in regard to the 10,000 wrongs of the American slave, you would enforce the strictest silence and would hail him as an enemy of the nation who dares to make those wrongs the subject of public discourse. You are all on fire at the mention of liberty for France or for Ireland, but are as cold as an iceberg at the thought of liberty for the enslaved of America.
You discourse eloquently on the dignity of labor, yet you sustain a system which, in its very essence, casts a stigma upon labor. You can bear your bosom to the storm of British artillery to throw off a 3-penny tax on tea, and yet wring the last hard-earned farthing from the grasp of the black laborers in your country. You profess to believe that of one blood God made all nations of men to dwell on the face of the earth, and have commanded all men everywhere to love one another, yet you notoriously hate and glory in your hate all men whose skins are not colored like your own.
You declare before the world, and are understood by the world to declare, that you hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and yet you hold securely in a bondage which, according to your own Thomas Jefferson, is worse than ages of that which your fathers rose in rebellion to oppose, a 7th part of the inhabitants of your country.
Fellow citizens, I will not enlarge further on your national inconsistencies. The existence of slavery in this country brands your republicanism as a sham, your humanity as a base pretense, and your Christianity as a lie. It destroys your moral power abroad. It corrupts your politicians at home. It saps the foundation of religion. It makes your name a hissing and a byword to a mocking earth.
It is the antagonistic forces in your government, the only thing that seriously disturbs and endangers your union. It feathers your progress. It is the enemy of improvement, the deadly foe of education. It fosters pride. It breeds insolence. It promotes vice. It shelters crime. It is a curse to the earth that supports it, and yet you cling to it as if it were the sheet anchor of all your hopes. Be warned. A horrible reptile is coiled up in your nation's bosom. The venomous creature is nursing at the tender breast of your youthful republic. For the love of God, tear away and fling from you the hideous monster, and let the weight of 20 millions crush and destroy it forever.
But it is answered in reply to all this, that precisely what I have now denounced is, in fact, guaranteed and sanctioned by the Constitution of the United States, that the right to hold and to hunt slaves is a part of the Constitution framed by the illustrious fathers of this republic. Then I dare to affirm, notwithstanding all I have said before, your fathers, instead of being the honest men I have before declared them to be, were the veriest impostors that ever practiced on mankind. This is the inevitable conclusion, and from it there is no escape. But I differ from those who charge this baseness on the framers of the Constitution of the United States. It is a slander upon their memory, at least so I believe, and others have, as I think, fully and clearly vindicated the Constitution from any design to support slavery for an hour.
Allow me to say in conclusion, notwithstanding the dark picture I have on this day presented of the state of the nation, I do not despair of this country. There are forces in operation which must inevitably work the downfall of slavery. I therefore leave off where I began, with hope, while drawing encouragement from the Declaration of Independence, the great principles it contains, and the genius of American institutions. My spirit is cheered by the obvious tendencies of the age. Nations do not now stand in the same relation to each other as they did ages ago. No nation can now shut itself up from the surrounding world and trot round in the same old path of its fathers without interference.
The time was when such could be done, but a change has now come over the affairs of mankind. Walled cities and empires have become unfashionable. The arm of commerce has borne away the gates of the strong city. Intelligence is penetrating the darkest corners of the globe. Wind, steam, and lightning are its chartered agents. Oceans no longer divide, but link nations together. From Boston to London is now a holiday excursion. Space is comparatively annihilated. Thoughts expressed on one side of the Atlantic are distinctly heard on the other. In the fervent aspirations of William Lloyd Garrison, I say, and let every heart join in saying it, all God the speed the day when human blood shall cease to flow, in every clime be understood the claims of human brotherhood, and each return for evil good, not blow for blow. That day come all feuds to end, and change into a faithful friend each foe. Thank you, Paula.
We'd give you one chance before you walk out to just hear all of your voices together in one song for one verse. You've lent your voices to Frederick Douglass's wisdom and love for country. Could we ask you to, I'm going to ask you to stand up. And for those of you that don't know the song, I'm just going to go through it quickly, one verse, but I think many of them do. Ain't gonna let nobody turn us around, turn us around, turn us around. We ain't letting nobody turn us around. We're gonna keep on walking. We're gonna keep on talking. We're gonna march to freedom's land. You got it? All right. Now I need to hear you all right? All right. And for all of you that might be listening through the stream, you get up and sing too. All right? All right. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching down to freedom land. Marching down to freedom land. Let it be hear you louder. Marching down to freedom land. Yes, thank you all for being here.